It showed his profound sensitivity to any group of living beings, animals, humans, whatever, who are on the brink of extinction. And, in the case of the Patagonian situation, those peoples did become extinct. And he was just overwhelmingly saddened by that situation and saddened by the situation that so many species have here on the planet today.
Welcome to the ClimateGenn podcast. My name is Nick Breeze. 2025 is the centenary year of the birth of the author and conservationist Gerald Durrell. In this episode, I'm discussing a newly published book of previously unseen writing by Gerry Durrell, titled Myself and Other Animals, edited together by his widow, Lee Durrell. For a bit of disclosure, I am related to Gerry, as my grandmother was Margo Durrell, his sister, as satirised in books like My Family and Other Animals. Whilst doing work experience at the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust, also known as Jersey Zoo, in the Channel Islands, it was 35 years ago, and I recall eating my sandwiches in a small auditorium, watching a slideshow and listening to the following quote read aloud by Gerry. "The world is as delicate and as complicated as a spider's web. And like a spider's web, if you touch one thread, you send shudders running through all the other threads that make up the web. We're not just touching the web, we're tearing great holes in it." In this conversation with Lee, we traverse many topics, including Gerry's inner world, his huge empathy for all living beings, including people, and of course, the fabulous work today of the Durrell Trust that has worked with over 100 critically endangered species in captive breeding programs and has rewilding projects going on all over the world, including a young one underway in Scotland. This week I will be uploading my interview with the Ukrainian producers of the movie Divya, a documentary looking at the destruction of nature caused by Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Coming soon, I'll be reviewing 2025 with David Spratt, Director of the Breakthrough National Centre for Climate Restoration in Australia. I'll also be speaking as well with the Dean of Clark University School of Climate, Environment and Society in Massachusetts, that's Lou Leonard. And I'll be speaking with Paul Hoggett, author and co-founder of the Climate Psychology Alliance. So there's plenty more coming. Thank you to all subscribers, to all members, and to everyone who comments, shares, likes, and emails me. Thank you very much. Lee, it's great to see you, and thank you very much for agreeing to come on and talk about the posthumous biography, Myself and Other Animals, of Gerald Durrell. In the book, you've drawn on many of Gerry's reflections and quotes, and it's a portrait of an intensely thoughtful and serious man, which to some may seem at odds from the very playful and comedic guy that we see through My Family and Other Animals and all the dramatizations. How did you go about selecting the pieces that went into this book?
Well, hi, Nick. Thank you. And thanks for having me on your program. It was really difficult to select because Gerry was not only a prolific writer of books, but he also did lots of poetry and limericks and sketches and plays and, things like that. So what I wanted to do, because this is his centenary year, he would have been 100 years old this year, I really wanted to show his journey and his development as his mission unfolded. He was devoted entirely to saving species from extinction. And he's always said he kind of had to write to be able to underpin that. And his writings do reflect that. And so I chose sort of almost chronologically to show how he developed his thoughts about the natural world and saving species, why we had to do it, what we human beings had been doing to the planet and why it was so necessary. And so I think if you follow through the book, you will see it kind of naturally goes in that direction. But I was so sorry that I couldn't include some of the limericks and the sketches and things like that. You see some of the sketches on the end papers. I was able to get. Anyway, I think there's another book there of Gerry's, fictional fictions, poems, and things like that.
There was one thing that struck me, especially when he was writing about his childhood, which most people will be familiar with from the dramatizations and so on. But he talks about Theodore Stephanides, and he immediately comments on how he didn't treat him as a child. He liked him because he spoke to him as if he was an equal. And then he said afterwards, as my family do. And that was quite an insightful comment. And in the book, you also include these very sort of intimate letters with his mother and with Larry. And I love the way at the end of the one to Larry, he says, "You don't know any insanely rich people, do you? One as fond as you." When you think back from your experience, how did you perceive Gerry's relationship with his family, especially Larry and Margo? Because obviously Margo was my grandmother and Larry just as a fellow writer.
The family relationship, and certainly in my experience, and remember I came on board, we married in 1979, so I knew the family from that time. So very sadly, I never knew your great-grandmother, Louisa. She passed away in 1964, I think it was. But I knew Lawrence and Margo very, very well. And Margo used to come with us on trips and come visit us down in our house. We had a house in the south of France. We all went to Venice together one time. Anyway, she was wonderful. I adored your grandmother, and we just always had a lot of fun. And there was a lot of love and laughter. And same with Larry. I mean, Larry himself was, really quite a formidable intellect, and he talked in exactly the way he wrote. It's a little bit intimidating sometimes, but he was so funny. And, the people always say there's a big rivalry between the two of them as writers, but that wasn't true. Larry really championed every success that Gerry had and vice versa. So it was a lovely family to be part of. Going back to Louisa, as I say, I never met her, but I know Gerry's ex-wife, first wife, quite well, Jackie. And Jackie was, thrown in at the deep end of this family back in the 50s, but she adored Louisa, and she just sung her praises. So she was also a most wonderful woman. So I think it was a very loving family and lots of fun.
We were talking about fun, and the descriptions of the animals in the book is fantastic. I found myself sort of chuckling, and then I actually started Googling them because I was thinking, are these actually accurate? I mean, there was the supercilious, I'm reading them, the supercilious toad, the red euchari, with the bold heads.
You got it. Yes.
With their red faces recovering from scarlet fever. And they really, really do look like it. And the Emperor Tamarin with the enormous Kaiser moustache. But beyond the observations, and I think these are so tangible, they really draw people in. And what are some of the critical components? Because obviously you were not just observing, you had a much more serious mission as conservationists. What were the steps to getting a captive breeding project going, which became the sort of mission in a way?
As Joe would always say, the first thing you've got to do is to know your animal inside out, in order to be successful at breeding in captivity. And that's knowing all of its likes and dislikes. This is exactly what Gerry did on his early expeditions in the 40s and 50s, would get to know the animals very intimately. But then you've also got to know their ecology, their wild ecology. What do they really require? So the two are of course related, what they need in captivity, what they need in the wild. So you've got to do that first, so study them. And then second, as a proper conservationist, you need to understand what the threats are to them in the wild. And quite often that means going out and doing field work and ecological studies, so that when the day comes and you want to either reintroduce the ones you've bred back to the wild or to save the ones in the wild, you know what you're up against, and you can devise your solutions and plans for trying to overcome those threats. So I think those are sort of two equally important things. But Nick, you touched on something right at the beginning of this question, which was Gerry's power of description. And I think that as a writer, that's actually one of his greatest contributions to conservation, because he got people to be emotionally connected to the animals. After reading Gerry's descriptions, you have a real empathy for these animals. And I think, unless human beings feel a connection to nature and the animals and the plants and the planet, we're not going to change. We're not going to change our ways. So that's one thing Gerry also did as a conservationist, to connect people to nature and to animals.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And talking about so much of the climate stuff, we're often confronted with charts and tables and percentages and parts per million, and no one's got a clue what anyone's talking about, the 1.5 degrees, and
Yeah.
it doesn't mean anything. And yet, I remember when all of these emperor penguins died, the response was super emotional.
Yeah. Yeah.
These were animals, and in Gerry's books, these things really do come alive, and you feel like you're looking at them through his eyes in this book in particular as well. I mean, they were making me laugh, but at the same time, I had to go and check that they did actually look like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there was one chapter on Patagonia, and it was extremely sort of melancholic. It reminded me of Hamlet. He's holding
Oh,
the
holding the skull.
skull and sort of thinking about these indigenous people who weren't here anymore. And there was very much pointing and saying, yeah, we did this really. This is another human so-called civilization outcome. And this seems to be a perpetual thing that we're all involved in still today, is the consequences of our own actions. And in selecting, because you sort of obviously picked this chapter, how did it speak to you in the context of what Gerry was trying to say and what he was thinking?
Yeah. Yeah, Nick, I think it's really relevant to Gerry's thought processes and how he developed. I think it showed his profound sensitivity to any group of living beings, animals, humans, whatever, who are on the brink of extinction. And, in the case of the Patagonian situation, those peoples did become extinct. And he was just overwhelmingly saddened by that situation and saddened by the situation that so many species have here on the planet today. Yeah, his sensitivity to it, yeah.
In the introduction, and again, this is something that we're experiencing a lot today. You very clearly highlight the plight of rainforests around the world. You give some numbers on that, and in the book, Gerry also, he repeatedly states the colossal damage of what humans are doing, and thinking this is the late 80s and the early 90s when he's talking now. If you cast your mind back specifically to reference the book here, is that you were in Belize, and he describes you both as jaded conservationists. It's almost like the opposite of what I'd expect you to be on these magnificent trips. How tangible to you was the impact of humanity on the natural world, even back then?
Well, for Gerry, certainly I think it was tangible from very, very early age. I mean, that really sort of describes how he moved from, his early expeditions in the 40s and 50s. He was collecting animals for zoos to sell to zoos. And he just had sort of an epiphany then, seeing the outcomes of humans' behavior to the planet, whether it was deforestation or habitat degradation or overexploitation. And, he knew what was happening. He was right there. He was in West Africa. He was in South America and could see it happening all around him. And that's one reason he decided that he would set up a zoo that would be devoted to saving species from extinction. All the other zoos, most of the other zoos those days, they were just menageries. And you know what they said to him? When he would bring the animals back, sell them to the zoos, but quite often they would die within a few weeks because people didn't know how to look after wild animals. But then the zoo people would say to Gerry, "Oh, don't worry, dear boy, there are plenty more where they came from." And that was red rag to a bull. That is really when he decided he was going to do it his way, and he knew it needed to be done. So from an early age, he knew what was happening. I mean, then in the 60s, he and his first wife, Jackie, went to big trips to New Zealand and Australia. And I've got some photographs of Gerry looking at all the wedge-tailed eagles killed by the farmers for supposedly attacking their sheep. And they would string them up on the barbed wire fences to supposedly tell other eagles not to come and attack the sheep. And Gerry, oh God, it drove him absolutely wild. So he was pretty jaded by the time we were in Belize. And then for my part, I did my dissertation research in Madagascar in the early 70s. And that most amazing, wonderful country, which has just got the most incredible biodiversity on the planet, really. I watched and witnessed and saw habitat destruction just absolutely rampant there, even way back then. So, I did kind of know the score. And discussing it all with Gerry, I really did know. So by the time we got to Belize, and don't get me wrong, Belize is a wonderful country and lots of intact rainforest, but everywhere on Earth, Nick, is touched by our activities, and generally in a very negative way for biodiversity.
How were warnings received back then?
Back then in the 70s, I don't know. I think there were a few of us who knew what was happening, but people just said, "Oh, what a shame," or even if they said that, but didn't do anything about it. Yeah, it's not really different now, is it?
Well, no, it's not. And he actually mentions in the text, he says, well, we've got this conference coming up in Rio in Brazil, which was, the Rio Earth Summit. At that summit, I mean, I've quoted it myself. They said, if we don't stop what we're doing, then sometime in the next century, life for humans could be terminal. And that evolved into the COP process. We've just had another COP in Brazil, which failed. The indigenous people broke in and protested.
I think maybe we've inched forward a bit, but it's like doing species conservation. You take 2 steps forward and 3 back, but sometimes 3 forward and 2 back, and it's just a very slow process. And certainly my worry is it all too late? I don't think it is yet, but the thing is, Nick, the difference now, I think, is that people really know. They've no excuse for not knowing what is happening, and a few ways to stop it from happening. And why don't we? That's just what mystifies me.
We are starting to see how interconnected everything is. I used to worry myself stupid about climate change, but now climate change and biodiversity interact. You can't have one without the other. And, that's becoming more well known. But the thing is, it's the amount of time we have to
left to address that. Yeah. People often ask me if Gerry was hopeful, and, being a jaded conservationist, was he ever really hopeful? And I think one of the last passages in the book show that he did have some sort of hope for things. Could I do a reading?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
But what happened was we put a time capsule in the foundations of our educational building, and it was put there by the Princess Royal, who is our patron, the patron of the trust. And Gerry wrote a letter and put quite a few things in the capsule. I think we put a blown pink pigeon egg in the capsule. We put a couple of his books in there, but he also wrote a letter. This is 1988. At the end of this letter, this is the hopeful thing, I think. End of the letter, he said, we hope that there will be fireflies and glowworms at night to guide you, and butterflies in hedges and forests to greet you. We hope that your dawns will have an orchestra of birdsong, and that the sound of their wings and the opalescence of their colouring will dazzle you. We hope that there will still be the extraordinary varieties of creatures sharing the land of the planet with you to enchant you and enrich your lives as they have done for us. We hope that you will be grateful for having been born into such a magical world.
That's almost the young Gerry's bringing back that wonder of childhood and nature and the sort of the very positive side. He did say that if he could give a child anything, it would be the gift of his childhood. And through the books, I think he's done that in many respects, because I meet a lot of people who really have been touched by those books and those encounters with animals and so on.
I meet so many people in the conservation world, the scientists, the educators, the vets, whoever, who all say they got into what they're doing because of reading Gerry's books. And it's really extraordinary how many, and particularly this year, the Centenary year, because I've been going around talking about the book to lots of different people. And, you know, their lives were really, really touched and affected by him.
Do you feel that it's percolated down? It's still very much alive?
I do. Well, certainly in my world. And I hope that this year, with a little bit of the attention that's been brought to the book. So, for example, here in Corfu, I kind of organized a concert to celebrate Gerry's 100th year, and performances of the play of My Family and Other Animals, which of course resonated here in Corfu. We translated it from English into Greek, and we had this wonderful big pop-up screen with the Greek translations on. It was really, really wonderful. So yeah, percolating down. It's got to do it more and more. But Gerry passed away in 1995. And since that time, we've done wonderful things with the little pygmy hog from India. Did you read about that? The smallest member of the pig family, rarest pig. And we've done breeding and releases and rewilding of their habitats. We work a lot in Madagascar, for example, and in Brazil. And in the last 8 years, and I'm all full of this now because I've just heard the results. We had an 8-year strategy, and we've just been analyzing the outcomes and whether we met the goals that we had set for ourselves. And so we are working, we being the trust, Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust, working on rewilding in 13 sites around the world. You know, some are more ahead than others. And we have put on the road to recovery more than 100 species of animals that were on the brink of extinction. We have a training academy, training in conservation. With those graduates are involved in more than 500 projects around the world that are putting species back on the road to recovery. The early days yet.
Fantastic.
And then the other goal that we had, and this brings us back to Gerry's writing, I think, was to make 1 million people better connected to nature. Connecting 1 million people to nature. Now, how do you measure that? That's been one of the most difficult to measure. But thinking of the number of people in the last 8 years who've come and visited us at Jersey Zoo, and we, you know, very much in the educational side of things, trying to get people connected to nature. Gerry's books themselves, as we said earlier, bring people become more emotionally involved in animals and nature. And anyway, I think it's a bit too hard to say 1 million, but in all of our projects around the world and at our zoo, we try very hard to do that.
It's an amazing story, really, because the zoo is his legacy, it's his afterlife in a way, because it carries on, it keeps going. And, you know, I remember as a kid, we still had the cages from the early expeditions in Margo's garden. Yeah. And, you know, from Bournemouth to Jersey to this, I mean, the people who have been there speaking, David Niven.
David Attenborough has been there. Jimmy Stewart was there in the very early days. You know, all these sort of famous people. And it's, you know, it's really pretty well known in the world. I think not everybody, but we're trying to change that, Nick. We're trying really hard to change it.
Well,
let me just say the Jersey Zoo is really kind of like the tip of the iceberg of the things that we do around the world. The trust employs about 250 people, and half of those are certainly not in Jersey, but they're in the places where we work around the world. One thing that we've done, and I think Gerry would be really, really pleased to see this, is the work in rewilding. I know rewilding is a very emotive word these days, and some people do it right and some people do it wrong. But we, I think, are doing it the right way with getting local people on side to try to bring back to nature areas that have been terribly degraded. The most exciting project, I think, we just started it not even 2 years ago, is that we have been able to lease a huge tract of land in Scotland. I don't know if you know, Scotland is one of the most severely degraded countries in the world in terms of biodiversity, because of all the grazing and monoculture forestry, peat, damaging the peat to set up for grazing and all that. But we have been given this 100-year lease on a piece of land, and we are working to restore it. We are reducing the number of deer to get them back into sort of ecological balance. We are repairing the peat. We're kind of doing a zipping up the peat drainage channels to bring the proper hydrology back to the area. We will be taking out monoculture forestry stands. And already after 2 years, you can actually see the native plants coming back. And when those native plants come back, we will be getting native animals back, like, capercaillies and mountain hares and hen harriers.
That's amazing.
All sorts of things, So it's exciting. It's really exciting. I obviously won't be around to see it. You won't. But, well, that's not true. Hang on. That's not true. In the 2 years, we've actually seen some changes. If I make it for another 20, I think the place will be beautiful again. I might make it to 20. I don't know.
Well, restoring peatlands is both for biodiversity and for climate a really important.
Fantastic carbon sinks, and they just need to be maintained that way. Yeah. So anyway, that's the most recent thing that the trust has done, and I think Gerry, would have been amazed and proud and really happy about it.
And with the academy, you are bringing people from all of these distant places or from wherever and training them how to look after the animals in their own habitats. I mean, I've always thought that was inspired and, quite an amazing thing to be doing.
That was something that Gerry was really so proud of, as our academy. And I remember in the very early days, what happened was the zoo bought the property next door and we turned it into dormitories and libraries and things like that. And then people would come over to work in the zoo, or we have a big lecture theatre and bring people in for lecturing. In the garden there, we would play croquet on the lawn Gerry and I bought the academy a croquet set years and years ago. And at any one time, we might have a dozen students, 20 students. Anyway, we're all playing croquet one time. And Gerry, what year was this? This would have been in the early 80s. And Gerry just burst into tears. And he said, I never, ever thought that I would see people from a dozen different countries here at my zoo studying the kinds of things that we know we need to do for the sake of the planet. He was just overcome.
It's amazing, 25 years beyond his own life, it's all still operating, and you're talking about projects that will extend probably way beyond our lives. So, yeah.
So there is hope, Nick. There is hope if we can just keep up that momentum and people join us and people start their own projects, and it can be done. It's just a question: is there a will to do it? Is there a will for people to see beyond their own immediate human desires of, power and wealth and that, or even day to day? People's got to live day to day, but maybe there are too many people on the planet to be able to make it all work together.
Too many people doing stupid things quite often. Yeah. I probably fall into that category from time to time. Thank you very much. It's been great to speak to you. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I'm probably a bit biased, but I think
you're probably a bit biased. Anyway, no, thank you for having me on, and thanks for asking all the great questions.
If you are concerned about the future, then why not travel with me through every COP conference from COP21 in Paris to COP28 in Dubai by ordering my book, COP Out: How Governments Have Failed the People on Climate. In Cop Out, you'll gain insights into what is actually going on in these supposed world-saving conferences and how we have ended up in this dire era of dangerous consequences. You can order Cop Out via the link in the notes or on any online bookstore worldwide in paperback or audio version.